بنام آن که جان را فکرت آموخت چراغ دل به نور جان برافروخت. When I was told the topic about which I would be expected to talk, the first thing that came to mind was a famous qasida by Hallaj. The poem begins, اقتلوني يا ثقاتي إن في قتلي حياتي. Kill me, my reliable friends. In killing me is my life. The second line of the poem sums up the Islamic understanding of life and death. وَمَمَاتِي فِي حَيَاتِي وَحَيَاتِي فِي مَمَاتِي. My death is in my life, and my life is in my death. Now, before all else, these words assert the truth of tawhid. They acknowledge that there is no God but God, no reality but the real, and nothing alive but the living who does not die. They also remind those who are still passionately attached to life in this world that their life is a metaphor, a majaz, for true life, and that this metaphor will disappear tomorrow, farda, as my favorite author would have it. So Hallaj's poem is a wake-up call, as Sufi poetry so often is. Now, countless scholars, poets, and Sufis have asserted the truth that there is no life but the life of the alive, the ever-standing Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum over Islamic history, thereby reasserting the clear message of the Quran and the Sunnah. Instead of citing a few examples, I thought it would be more useful to quote my favorite Sufi text, not least because it has remained largely unknown in the literature. I'm talking about Ruh al-Arwah, The Repose of the Spirits, which is a 500-page Persian commentary on the divine names, written by Ahmad Sam'ani, who lived in the flourishing city of Merv in Khorasan, in today's Uzbekistan, and who died in the year 1140. That makes him a younger contemporary of Al-Ghazali and an almost exact contemporary of Sana'i, the first of the great Persian Sufi poets. The Repose of the Spirits is a masterpiece of Persian literature, but it was mostly ignored in the tradition, and I don't know why, and it was not brought to the attention of modern scholarship until it was published in 1989. Ever since I became acquainted with the text, I have been astounded by its beauty and its profundity. Now let me offer two passages from Sam'ani, both of which present the heart of the Islamic understanding of life and death and demonstrate explicitly the manner in which Sufi authors, in talking about death before death, were always looking back to the Prophet, not simply to his saying, die before you die, but rather to the reality of his existence in this world. The first passage is drawn from the commentary on the divine name Al-Halim, the forbearing. As he often does, Sam'ani begins by citing a poem by Sana'i. Sana'i is pointing to the danger of self-admiration, ijab or ujba, in the path of God. Self-admiration, ijab, is the mistaken notion that we ourselves are achieving something and going somewhere. What we need to do is step aside from the self, to die before we die, and to free up the divine guest, which has been imprisoned by our illusions. This guest is the Spirit of God that was blown into us at our creation. Freeing up the spirit is never accomplished by the I, the nafs, the soul, the self. Rather, all the work is done by the living who never dies. So here's Sana'i, talking about, he begins, his first line is about becoming a shaheed, which is, of course, is a very current topic, and people normally don't pay attention to the point he's making. But in any case, if you become a martyr in the religion's road 100 times, you will still be a gabber if you see yourself in the midst. A gabber, of course, is a dualist, coming from the word for Zoroastrian. Here, in this world, here you taint copper with gold, and then you boast. What benefit will that have there when you see the touchstone? Will you ever have the pain to see yourself without caprice? Caprice, hava, of course, the worst of the false gods. Will you ever be the man to see yourself with contempt? Treat this celestial guest with honor, so that on the day it flies beyond this dome, you will see it as your host. Adorn this peacock of the throne with every sort of wisdom, so that outside the cage, you will see the joy of the nest. Now, after quoting this poem, Samani explains to his readers, whom he typically addresses as dervishes, why they must die to the illusion of life. I quote, "The greatest veil in the road is the veil of mortal nature and the blockage of created nature. This blockage must be struck down and this veil lifted so that you may reach the threshold of the real, al-haq. Whatever is less than the real is creation, whether in this world or in the afterworld, whether it is soul or spirit, obedience or disobedience, as long as you have not removed yourself from this world. From this world by not being at ease with it. From the afterworld by not looking at it. From the soul by not following it. From the heart by not sinking wherewithal from it. And from disobedience by not paying attention to it, you will not be given proximity to the real. Once you have traversed this path, taken the street of disengagement, tajreed, to its end, and died to yourself before death, the work will still be in danger from the poisonous gaze of mortal nature. If you do all this, and then you look back at your own deeds for the blink of an eye, a sash of unbelief will be made from that look and fastened to the waist of your days. O dervish, it is better to be in the station of distance, remorseful at not finding, than to be in the station of proximity, admiring yourself for having found. Self-admiration is the prelude to disappearance, and remorse is the vanguard of bestowal. In short, you must purify the road of self. You must tear away the clothing of mortal nature, and you must pour dust on your dust-dwelling eyes. Samani devotes much of his commentary on the name Al-Azim, Azim, the tremendous, to the Prophet's Mi'raj, explaining the wisdom, the hikmat, that is hidden in the account from several points of view. It's a long passage. In the following short excerpt, he explains that the Prophet's ascent to God is showing us that he was already dead to himself. You may say that the wisdom in taking him on the Mi'raj was to show that his state in this world was like his state in the afterworld. The meaning of these worlds is that all people have a companionship and a commingling with the soul. As long as the spirit has not become separate from the soul, it will not be taken to the celestial world. Mustafa, however, had no companionship, commingling, and mixing with the soul. Rather, in terms of meaning, ma'na, his soul had become all spirit. And his spirit was waiting for opening, futuh. In order to realize this meaning before death and demise, his soul was conveyed, along with the spirit, to the station of the spirit. Do you not see that Mustafa, because he does not have the companionship of the soul, will not mention the soul on the day of resurrection? Now here Samani is referring to a well-known account of the day of resurrection that he has already discussed in a number of passages, so the reader by this time will be familiar with it if he didn't already know it from before. Now in one of these earlier passages where he writes about the resurrection, he explains what he means when he says that Mustafa will not mention the soul on the day of resurrection. So here's his explanation. Do you not see that when the house of subsistence becomes apparent, that is, the afterworld, everyone will rush to enter it more quickly? He will be standing, Mustafa, however, will be standing on the plane of the resurrection, the shawl of intercession on his shoulders, and the ring of love in his ear. Oh, Muhammad, are you not going? He will say, I will not go so long as anyone remains. Tomorrow, that is on the resurrection, at the resurrection, everyone will be talking on his own behalf. They will be saying, my soul, nafsi, nafsi. But that paragon of paragons, that emperor of the planets of prophethood, will not be talking on his own behalf. When he says at that time, my community, ummati, ummati, will not be the cause of the salvation of the community. It will be for the sake of manifesting the purity of his own secret core. It will make apparent to the creatures that this is a servant who never said, my soul, on his own behalf. Coming back to this passage about the Prophet's ascension, Samani now turns to another way of explaining why the Prophet was dead to his soul already in this life. I quote, in the splendorous scripture, the exalted Lord says, as for him who feared the station of his Lord, and prohibited the soul, its caprice, its hawa, surely the garden shall be the shelter. Now, if the soul's caprice is to be prohibited, there must first be a soul. But when he described Mustafa, he said, nor does he speak from caprice. Had there been a soul, the soul would have had caprice. Then he would have been negating a soul that exists. But negating an existing thing is absurd. All creatures must have death in order to be rid of the soul. Since he was rid of the soul in the state of life, his state before death was like his state after death. So before death, his soul reached the station that spirits reach after death. Once death came, his state after death was just like his state before death. And if Mustafa's death were like that of others, affirming his messengerhood after death would be absurd, for the dead person is not a messenger. But since the command has come to say, until the resurrection, I bear witness that Muhammad is God's messenger, it is correct that his death is life. The books of the people will be presented to him in the grave, and he will be happy and give thanks for their obedience. And he will be sad and ask pardon for their disobedience. So it is correct that his death is life. Hence, his life was death, and his death life. So long as he was alive, he was aware of some people and not others. When he closed his eyes, he became aware of all the states of his community. Were his death like the death of others, it would be necessary for his knowledge to decrease, not increase. His life was given the attribute of death because he did not have the soul. For the dead person has nothing to do with the soul. And because he did not have free choice. For the dead person has no free choice. And because he did not have opposition. For the dead person has no opposition. And because he did not have desires. For the dead person has no desires. This is why the real said, you did not throw when you threw, addressing Muhammad, but God threw. Thus, he negated him with, you did not throw, and he affirmed him with, when you threw. What a marvelous business! How can one thing be both affirmed and negated? What is the meaning? Oh, annihilated from your own attributes. Or subsistent through my attributes. ای فانی از صفات خود باقی به صفات من. This, in short, is the message of Sufism. Become annihilated to yourself and subsistent in the real. Be dead to yourself and alive in God. Thank you.